engraving settings with the AliencellX1 60W diode laser and Aliencell Space software. Create one labeled Material Test Grid to test the most useful speed and power range for any material, find the best engraving settings, and save time and material. To build a test around the photo you actually want to engrave, start a new project and import the photo. Starting with your source image ensures that every grid sample shows how this specific photo responds to the laser and the material. To make the test meaningful, keep the photo proportional while resizing it. Then set the target width or height. Use the image controls to improve tonal detail by balancing clarity, brightness, shadows, highlights, contrast, and white clip. Prepare a photo with clear, readable detail before testing laser settings. For a fair comparison, duplicate the prepared image and keep both versions on the canvas. This preserves your original while giving you a dedicated version for the material test. To evaluate the part of the image that matters most, open the image editor to crop around the portrait for a practical result, making sure to crop important part of the image, such as faces. Zoom in and out to position the crop precisely, then apply it. You now have a compact sample that tests quickly while retaining important facial details. Now, turn the prepared sample into a tool for finding the best settings. Open the tool library and choose Material Test. This creates a labeled photo engraving grid instead of relying on a single, untested setting. To narrow down the best engraving range efficiently, enter the minimum and maximum speed values, then set the power range. Choose a small number of rows and columns, leave space between the samples, and confirm the. Here, the test uses speeds from 100 to 300 millimeters per second and powers from 10 to 40 watts, so every square clearly identifies its setting. Before sending anything to the machine, make the array easy to inspect and manage. Select the generated test layout where the speed and power labels identify each sample, and move unrelated artwork out of the way. This array becomes your reference for selecting final photo engraving settings. To position the test in the actual material instead of estimating from the canvas, open Live View and check the laser bed. Then, load your material into the AliencellX1. Place the sheet flat on the bed, align it in the camera view, and secure it with the 4 magnetic clamps so it cannot move during engraving or cutting, and finally close the LED. Open your camera view by clicking the snapshot button. Now you can place the array directly over the workpiece in the camera view on the real machine bed instead of an empty grid. For reliable focus and safe placement, use the distance menu to measure from a selected point on the material. Refresh the camera background if needed, and frame the array to confirm its physical size before processing. Once the grid is in position, open the job settings and select the Fine Maximum Acceleration preset. Start the process and let the machine create the labeled samples. Comparing the results reveals which speed and power combination produces the strongest photo engraving on this material. The test grid clearly shows how different combinations of speed and power affect the photo engraving. Lower speeds and higher power produce a much darker and more heavily burned result, while higher speeds and lower power give a lighter engraving with better control of the details. Based on these results, 20 watts power with a speed between 200 to 300 millimeters per second gives the most suitable range for this material. For the final full-size photo, I'll choose a setting within this range. Around 225 millimeters per second at 20 watts is a good starting point, and fine-tune it depending on how light or dark I want the final engraving. This simple test removes the guesswork and gives us a reliable starting point before engraving the full image. Once the test identifies a useful setting, apply it to the full photo. Select the bitmap, then enter the engraving power and speed you selected from the grid. Advanced settings are available for further control, while the image adjustments keep the photo ready for the selected Jarvis engraving mode. To finish the piece as a cut and engrave project, add a rectangle to define the boundary, then switch that shape to select basswood plywood at 3mm thickness so the cut parameters update to the material preset. You can now manage the engraved photo and its cut outline as separate operations on the same workpiece. For the final check, run framing around the positioned photo and boundary. Once the outline tracks correctly, start processing the completed job. A small, clearly labeled material test grid gives you a repeatable starting point for reliable photo engraving on future projects. It also makes it easier to compare settings and achieve more consistent results across different materials.